Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar where we'll be discussing and demonstrating using ConsoleWorks for privileged access management. I'm Pam Johnson, Director of Marketing at TDI Technologies. And on behalf of TDI, I'd like to thank all of you for your attendance and for your participation in today's short webinar. Before we begin, I would like to cover a couple of logistics. The first is about questions. We will be taking questions today. If you want to submit a question, if you could just find your GoToWebinar dashboard, and there should be a questions panel on there. We're going to locate that right now. Submit your questions using that method, and we'll get to them at the end of today's webinar. Secondly, I'd also let you know that we will be recording today's webinar, and the recording should be available in a couple of days for you to use for reference, or if you want to forward to a colleague or something like that. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Clyde Poole. Clyde is the Chief Security Officer at TDI Technology and also runs our professional services organization. He's been with TDI for over 10 years, and he's a frequent speaker at various security events around the nation. So for now, I would like to turn it over to Clyde.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Pam. Appreciate that introduction. We're going to deal with a lot of things this afternoon, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to discuss some of the challenges that I know that you are facing in your IT organization today. We have administrative staff of various kinds who have to have unfettered access in order to manage systems in our organization. We have full-time employees, we have vendors, we have contractors, and other part-time or partially used employees or personnel, all of whom have to have access to systems in order to do their jobs and to keep our IT organizations operational. Many of the systems that we have today require shared usernames, or they require shared passwords of various kinds. This is especially true with older equipment, but it's still true even with some of our newer systems today. And when any of these people who are actually doing their jobs do something, there's really no clear, consistent record of what they did, when they did it, and just something that an auditor or a manager could deal with to tell that the right thing was going on a particular system. We have a lot of security requirements today, more almost every day. They're legal, they're regulatory, they're internal policies. All of these things are affecting our ability to do things. And there are especially difficult security requirements around employees leaving or changing duties. And these all have to do with this privileged access, because when they leave or they change duties, we might wind up having to change passwords on hundreds of systems, changing usernames on hundreds of systems, and that's not a very good use of people's time. It costs money. It costs time. It costs effectiveness in our organization. And of course, we also have the problem of least privilege requirements. Least privilege requirements say that you shouldn't have any more privileges than you actually need to do the job you were supposed to do. And many of our systems today, both modern and old, don't really have a permissions or privileges model that allow for this least privilege requirement to be effective. So you have to kind of ask yourself, how do I ensure that the right people have access to my system, and how do I ensure that they have the level of access that they're supposed to have? How do I protect those shared usernames and passwords? How do I manage those? How do I administer them? And how do I know that the level of privilege that someone hasn't been abused? So what can ConsoleWorks do to help? ConsoleWorks can ensure that only the appropriate people gain access to a system or systems We can control at a very granular level what they are authorized to do. We can act as a gatekeeper. That is, we're going to own the ability to log into a particular system with a privileged account, and we're not going to share that username and password or that public key for public key authentication mechanism. We're not going to share that with everyone. ConsoleWorks is going to be the only owner, and the authorization that is granted by getting into ConsoleWorks is going to be the way that somebody's going to get to one of these systems with a privileged account. And all of this is going to provide a level of security that lowers your risk, and at the same time increasing your compliance with regulation and law and local policy. So let's take a look at some of these things inside of ConsoleWorks itself. I think almost all of you have already seen ConsoleWorks. I didn't see anyone that was a non-ConsoleWorks user in our list of attendees. So this should be at least somewhat familiar to you. You might not have this pop-up the way we have. This is something that you can optionally configure in ConsoleWorks, trying to get someone to acknowledge what your policy is about security on a system. And I'm going to log in. Just the process of logging in ConsoleWorks is part of this privileged access management that I was speaking of before, right? I actually have an account in ConsoleWorks, and that account is going to grant me the correct level of permissions and privileges on individual systems. So I'm going to log in with this Mr. Contractor username. Let's pretend I'm a contractor. So I log in. Whoops, it helps if I type the right password, obviously. So I log in as a contractor, and I log in and I granted a profile. For again, those of you who are familiar with the product understand about profiles. This is a role, if you will, inside of ConsoleWorks. The role actually is how I grant permissions and privileges in ConsoleWorks. So I've been granted this profile contractor, and that's going to control which systems I can see and what I can do on those systems. So I'm going to take a look at the systems that I'm allowed to see with this particular profile. And you can see there are 4 systems, 2 of which are actually not even functional right now. And those are the only systems I can see. As you'll see later in the demonstration, there are a lot more systems that this particular instance of ConsoleWorks is managing, but because of this person's profile, he only can see these. So I'm going to pick this machine, this Unix-based virtual machine, actually, and I'm going to try to connect to it through the console. And you can see that 3 out of the 5 methods of connecting to this console are grayed out. This particular user, because of his profile, can only connect in a read-only mode through Monitor, or through something called Controlled Connect. Controlled Connect is the way I'm going to choose to connect to this particular system. And Controlled Connect gives me a whitelist of commands that I'm allowed to perform on this particular machine. Only those commands are the ones that I can type. And under the control of the systems administrators for ConsoleWorks, I can make these commands abstract, real commands on the underlying system. So for example, the command gstat here is not a normal Unix command. But if I type gstat, what happens under the covers is a couple of other commands are run. Notice that it didn't show me what commands I ran, but it did present me with some information about the status of this particular Unix system. This whitelist is completely customizable by our customers and by our users. You can make it be anything you want, and you can control through whitelisting what a particular person can do. Sometimes that's not good enough. Sometimes you really need to be able to say, I want you to be able to do everything except for a few commands. And that's called blacklisting in most systems. We've implemented something that is a blacklisting mechanism. I'm going to put this particular control connect into the blacklist system. And at this point, I've got a root login prompt. I can type any normal command that somebody might type if they were trying to manage a system. But there are some commands, and in this case, I don't want this contractor to be able to connect to some other machine or to move data off of this machine. And so I'm going to restrict the commands that might have done that. So if this contractor tried to type SSH, he would get a warning saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Or maybe he'll try to type FTP. Nope, you're not allowed to do that. Or maybe he might try to type the mail command. Nope, you're not allowed to do that. And now it's actually kicked this person off. All right? And the blacklist command has been taken away from him. It's no longer in the list of allowed commands. And under the hood, you didn't see this, but under the hood, an event has been raised, and I'll show you that event in a minute, and an email message has been sent to security saying someone tried to violate the security policy while doing a blacklist while having full privileges on a particular system. So if I looked at the event occurrences that occurred using this profile, you can see that he can't see any event occurrences. That's because he's not allowed to see the fact that that security event occurred. So I'm going to log out now, and I'm going to log back in again with a privileged account. And if I look at the event occurrences now, I can see that there's this event called a threat here at the top on that machine that I was on, indicating that something bad had happened with the blacklist system on that machine. It told me who did it, okay, Mr. Contractor. I moved the mouse too quick. You can see there, Mr. Contractor. He did 3 commands that he wasn't supposed to do, and it forcibly disconnected them and locked him out of the system. On top of all of that, I've logged everything he did, okay? So I can actually look at the log file for this particular system and for that event. And you can see here's the log entry indicating that he was disconnected. And you can actually look back here and see here's where he tried to type SSH, here's where he tried to type FTP, and here is where he tried to type the mail command. So not only did I block him from doing those things, I made a complete record of what he did so that the auditors will be able to go back and understand what exactly occurred, and you might want to take some kind of action against the person as a result. Now, how does all of this get done inside of ConsoleWorks? Primarily, this is done with something called access control rules. The access control rules are relatively complicated, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time going over individual access control rules in detail, But I did want to show you what an access control rule looks like and how it was affected in this particular case. So we were logged in as the contractor profile, which is this profile here, okay? And if I take a look at that particular rule, you'll notice that this rule is an allow rule. That is, this says somebody is allowed to do something. The whole system of permissions around this is around default deny. In other words, if you haven't been allowed to do something, you were denied being able to do that. And in this case, this is an allow on consoles. And if I take a look at the profile selection, you can see that one of the profiles that's allowed here is contractor. So this profile is allowed under this rule to do something. Under resource selection, you'll see here are those 4 consoles that he can see. Again, he's allowed to do something with those consoles, all right? And then what he's allowed to do is here under the privileges. And there are lots of privileges, and I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see that there are a lot of privileges, most of which this particular profile is not allowed to do. You can see here the check mark back next to controlled connect, all right, is an allow, but normal connections are not allowed because there's no check mark here. Okay? That makes sense to everyone, I hope. And if you have questions about this, feel free to use the questioning system to actually ask those questions. So the other thing about all of this privileged access system is, like I said, protecting the usernames and passwords so you don't have to go change them. The idea here is, in this particular case, that you can use SSH with a public key for authentication to a system. And ConsoleWorks is going to be the owner of that key, and as part of the connection, you're going to automatically have the permissions that were allowed during that login, which is typically a privileged connection. Another one would be an SSH with a username and password, like this here, SSH with username and password. Again, ConsoleWorks is going to know the username. ConsoleWorks is going to know the password, but the user doesn't. He has to know his ConsoleWorks username and his ConsoleWorks password in order to have a profile that allows him connectivity to that device for him to be able to connect to that particular device. So let me connect to one of these machines just to show you what I mean. This is a oh, that's a bad choice. Yeah. This is a Red Hat Linux system. I can connect to it. And I've got a root connection. I didn't have to know the root username. I didn't have to know the root password. I'm just given a root connection automatically. And everything that I'm doing, no matter what it is, whether it's gibberish or real, okay, is actually being logged. So I can actually look at the log file for that particular system. As I looked at the log file for that command and control, and you can see here's all the gibberish and real commands that I typed, an indication of when I connect it, an indication of when I disconnect it from those devices. Now, we've gone through this relatively quickly, but that was actually my goal, right? If you have questions, remember, please type them into the questioning system, and we will now answer any of the ones that we got.
Great. Thanks, Clyde. We do have several questions. Thank you guys for being so active on here. The first one, Clyde, does ConsoleWorks integrate with Active Directory?
Oh, absolutely. Great question. You can have ConsoleWorks completely connected to Active Directory. so that you define who can log into ConsoleWorks and what their password is and what profile or profiles they get, all from the Active Directory interface without ever having defined usernames or associations with profiles inside of ConsoleWorks. This means that you can have one password for your Unix one password for your Windows logins, and it's the same username and password for ConsoleWorks and for anything else that's integrated with Active Directory. We also integrate with LDAP and with anything that uses a PAM library on a Unix system. However, with LDAP and the PAM integration, the ability to associate profiles is not there. So it's strictly a matter of authentication, that is passwords, when you integrate with LDAP or with a PAM library.
Okay. So this next question is actually two parts, so I'll ask the first part first.
Oh, joy. I love multi-part questions.
Okay, so this is relating to whitelist, blacklist. Are there limits for the number of entries in the whitelist and blacklist?
Only in your perseverance. That's the limit. No, the number of whitelist commands that you define is unlimited, and the blacklist mechanism is programmatic. Okay, and so you can have as many blacklisted commands as you would like. Or in fact, you could even have commands where they're only kind of partially blacklisted. For example, if you typed it one way, it wasn't. There might be a legal way to do something and a disallowed way of doing something, and you could actually do that with the blacklist mechanism as well.
Okay. So related to that, again, are the number of failures that the contractor did before being logged out configurable or always free? So there's probably a general configurable question.
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is it's 100% configurable. In fact, when we originally did this, we thought that the second they attempted one of the bad commands, they ought to be bumped out immediately. In our original demonstration, they got bumped immediately with just one. We picked three because it seemed to be kind of I don't know, kind of a reasonable way of doing it. But it could be one, it could be two, it could be three, it could be 50. Okay. It could be not at all. In other words, you just don't allow them to do the commands. You slap them on the wrist and don't tell anybody. It really is what you think your business process around this sort of thing should be.
So we could have a whitelist or a blacklist or a whitelist and a blacklist.
Absolutely. Okay. It really is about your business process. We're trying to build this so that ConsoleWorks doesn't dictate the business process.
Okay. The next question, can multiple people connect on the controlled access simultaneously, or is it simply the console connection, so one user at a time?
Yeah, I had to parse that one. Okay, the answer is, okay, yes to all parts. And now, so let me clarify what I just said. Underlying all of the command and control, the control connect mechanism is the same physical or logical connection that ConsoleWorks has to a device that was used in the normal connection method. That is, there is only one, okay? And for auditability purposes, most organizations only allow one read-writer at the same time. You can have multiple readers, but only one read-writer. That way you know for a fact that a particular command was typed by a particular user. Now, having said that, because of the way Control Connect works, it would be possible to actually put into the log file who typed which command. So you could have two people at the same time connected to the same connection. Now, the last part of that is sometimes you want to have multiple read-writers where each read-writer has their own session on the target machine, right? And we actually have a different connection method called session connection method, where each time somebody connects, they get a clean new session on the operating system. These connections do not go through the console connection. They go directly to the operating system the same way you would if you SSH'd to a particular system. And if I didn't cover all the bases, please follow up with another question, but I think I covered them all.
Okay. Here's another one, little multi-part, kind of multi-part question. So when setting up the SSH/password, I take it that the user setting up the connection knows the password. What happens on password change on the console itself?
Okay. I think I understand that question. The answer is that generally someone had to have known at least one person had to know the password, and that person is the person that configures things. It is possible, and we have experimented with, the ability for ConsoleWorks to actually change the password to a password it knows and not tell you what it was, all right? But to allow you to recover that password if you ever needed it. And so if you really wanted to do that, we could do that, all right? It is not the way we have normally set it up. We've normally set it up where there is one person who knows what the password is, and they did it. Now, the second part of that was, what about password changes? And so I know that in a lot of organizations there are required password change periods. There are two ways to think about this. One is that those are meant to prevent somebody from sharing a password accidentally, or you forgetting to change the password when somebody left. That's really what the purpose of those password changes were. I can see changing your policy that says that if ConsoleWorks is the only place that password is, you know, why do you need to change that password? But having said that, again, we have actually demonstrated the ability of having ConsoleWorks do the password change for you, and for it, again, to either share that password with someone or for ConsoleWorks to remember the password but allow you to recover that password later if you ever actually needed it for some other reason. Hopefully I answered that question. Yeah, the whole password thing is a real can of worms for almost everyone, and I recognize that. But again, it's going to be it's going to be one of those things where if you can conceive of a process to do it, we can make ConsoleWorks do that.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have today, Clyde. So if you think of something else that you'd like to ask afterwards, you know, you can contact support@tditechnologies.com, or we'll have some of our contact information on the next slide as it's coming out. So before I let you go, I just wanted to let you know of a couple more webinars that we'll be sponsoring actually in the coming months. They'll be short ones similar to what we have today. One will be on configuration management, and that's scheduled for April 29th at 1 o'clock, and that's Central Daylight Time, U.S. And we'll be discussing in that one how to eliminate security gaps resulting from cyber assets that are not properly configured or an unauthorized change was made for some reason. So that's the first one. The second webinar that we'll be doing is on secure remote access. That one will be on May 27th, again at 1 o'clock Central Daylight Time. And there we'll be discussing how to minimize the time it takes to remediate problems or to perform routine activities remotely. So both of those I think will be very interesting, again, very short webinars that we'll be putting on for you. So hopefully we'll see you there. So with that, this concludes the ConsoleWorks Privilege Access Management webinar. And as a reminder, the recording will be available in a couple of days, and we'll send that out to everybody here. So you can use it to forward to a colleague or just use for your reference. So as always, I'd like to thank you for participating today and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a good day.
The organizer